in Colombia is that this is a gift and it's something that's hard to teach. The process is not hard to teach. That's pretty clear and well defined. But the mindset, that's something different, and it's an advantage if harnessed correctly, right? If it harnessed well, that is an advantage that people have in Colombia, that mindset.
Let's talk about that MacGyver person in companies and in society. When I was young, I saw the program MacGyver. In Colombia, we call it MacGyver.
Yeah. Did I prove my hypothesis? Yes or no? If yes, okay, done. If no, okay, I learned, I write that down, I go to the next step. So you take that mindset and then you take the process and the discipline and you put them together. So I fully agree that especially as you want to scale, then the formal process becomes much, much more important.
In Colombia, we have a lot of entrepreneurs, and we promote the entrepreneurial behavior, spirit. In ANDI, we have 400 entrepreneurs. We want to talk with you a little bit about this concept that is so used in Colombia, that you call it jugar.
Yeah.
Recursividad, it could be a Spanish word for that. Could you introduce a little bit about what is a jugar mindset and behavior?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So jugar is, when I was doing my research in India many years ago, I was thinking about, well, how do people solve problems even if they don't have a lot of resources? So that could be resources like I don't have running water or electricity, or I don't have infrastructure even. So it's not just I don't have a big budget or I don't have enough headcount. And people were solving even really sometimes informal small problems, but sometimes big problems. And so I learned about this concept of jugar, which is kind of like, in English we might say a hack. In Colombia, you might say recursividad, which is something I learned about here recently, which I really appreciate. And it's being frugal, so high value, even if it's not about money, about being flexible, about having agility, mental agility. And it's also about being inclusive. So who is solving the problems and who are we solving problems for? So that is kind of the essence of jugar. And it's really also about solving problems with the resources that you have. And why is that important? Because oftentimes I see, especially in more established organizations, that people are waiting. I'm waiting for someone to tell me what to do. I'm waiting for someone to give me the resources. I'm waiting for something. But actually, if we think about this recursividad and this ingenuity that is not waiting for anyone, it's very, very powerful as a mindset. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what is jugar. It's similar to that resourcefulness of recursividad.
Yeah, maybe yesterday we was talking about that our economy is like in Colombia, we had a lot of informal people in the business area. You visit yesterday Comuna 13, you can see it by your own eyes, and we promote by ANDI to structure a more formal process of innovation based on R&D that we think is also okay. How we can mix both approaches, a jugar that is more recursivo, informal, and structured, and a business company process based on R&D.
I love this question, Alejo. Thank you for asking that. It's such an important one because what I've understood over the years is you have to have both, right? So even in an established organization, you have to have the flexible thinking and that space for creativity like recursividad, and you have to have a process or a structure, something within which you can operate so you're not all over the place. You're not trying to do all the things and not very well. What I have understood is that sometimes when people can operate in this mindset of ingenuity and resourcefulness, because it comes from the informal sector, I believe it's undervalued, that kind of thinking. Having said that, you might solve a small-scale problem with recursividad or jugar. Now, if jugar innovation, that phrase that we coined with my co-authors, was the kind of the formalization. So you take that mindset and then you take the process and the discipline and you put them together. So I fully agree that especially as you want to scale, then the formal process becomes much, much more important. But here's what I will tell you. So I work mostly in the US. I was talking with someone from the Stanford Biodesign program. And in that program, they're looking at, well, how do we create high value but low cost medical devices? So they bring people from India and other places in the world, mostly India, and then they have people from the US and some people from Palo Alto at Stanford. And what they told me was it's very hard. If you've grown up in Palo Alto and you're at Stanford, it might be hard to flex as fast or be as creative because you haven't had to think in this kind of way. Whereas even the physicians, so they're well-resourced people by and large, from India, they have a more flexible thinking style. So what I hope people really understand in Colombia is that this is a gift and it's something that's hard to teach. The process is not hard to teach. That's pretty clear and well-defined. But the mindset, that's something different, and it's an advantage if harnessed correctly, right? If it harnessed well, that is an advantage that people have in Colombia, that mindset.
Let's talk about that MacGyver person in companies and in society. When I was young, I saw the program MacGyver. In Colombia, we call it MacGyver.
MacGyver.
Yeah. And my question is, we have to encourage this MacGyver behavior inside companies. We can choose people and train about like MacGyver abilities in order to innovate more frequently with a lot of tools that they had in the companies. What do you think about it?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with fear and risk aversion. So when we think about what are the biggest barriers to innovation and entrepreneurship in large organizations, I usually hear things like time, and these are real or perceived, right? So they might say resources, but maybe they have the resources they need. They say bureaucracy, they say hierarchy, and the biggest one is always fear and risk aversion. So the question I have to ask for the organization is, what is the culture that I'm building? And how am I reinforcing what it is that I say that I want? Because what I often find is leaders will call and they'll say, hey, can you help us build a culture of innovation? But nothing else changes. We don't really prioritize what's important. If we work on this innovation, we'll take something else away. And sometimes feel like, oh, if I try something and do it in a different way, I'll actually be penalized for it. I'll be punished in some way. So we have to support the smart risk-taking. And one of the ways we can do that is by talking about things that we've tried that are different. That leaders can model that kind of vulnerability. Reframing failure as learning, right? So we're not going to say, hey, that failed. It's like for anyone who went to chemistry class in 7th grade, when you have your little notebook, I don't know, did you do this where you have to write your hypothesis and meaning, what do we think is going to happen? And then you do your experiment and then you write down in your notebook, did I prove my hypothesis? Yes or no? If yes, okay, done. If no, okay, I learned, I write that down, I go to the next step. It's just a disproven hypothesis and we learn from it. That's where I think things get missed. So I think there might be a cultural risk aversion that doesn't really support sometimes a little bit of risk-taking that needs to be present for innovation to flourish.
In your keynote, you mentioned as well the entrepreneurs. In Colombia, we have a lot of entrepreneurs, and we promote the entrepreneurial behavior, spirit. In ANDI, we have 400 entrepreneurs. And Colombia, in general, has a high level of entrepreneurs. But sometimes we don't focus so much in this entrepreneurship behavior, and we don't promote it as well. And in your keynote was very interesting because you set out like a process for these entrepreneurs, some stages. You can share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And there are some similarities between entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs. Those are things like, well, if I'm an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, I am action-oriented. I am able to navigate ambiguity and uncertainty. It's something they excel at, right? They don't get sort of stuck. I can enlist or enroll other people because I can't do it all on my own. So those are some of the qualities that are similar. The difference is that the truth is in a large organization, you have a little more security, you have a little bit more resource. There's some pluses and minuses though, because the negative is you may not be able to move as fast. You have to figure out how to advance the organizational goals in a different way. That's sort of the magic of entrepreneurship. The process is basically 5 steps. So in studying some of the world's best intrapreneurs who really not only had ideas, but were able to execute on those ideas to the point where something was a commercial success, those people have a specific process. And what it is the first phase is indexing. They take stock of what they had. The second phase is called impact. So really focusing on what is the one thing you can do to have the most impact on whoever you're trying to serve. Then it's investigate. So it's kind of how do we, even through tiny, tiny actions, experiment our way forward. The 4th step is iterate. So based on what we learn in those experiments, in that investigation, how will we adjust? This is where I think companies should pay attention because they're risk averse. This process, candidly, I think innovation is a very honest process. And I think it's actually a smarter process than traditional business because when you're navigating the unknown, it's a really wise way to mitigate risk. And then the final 5th phase is implementation. So once we have understood, are we solving the right problem? We identify solutions, we test them out, and then we validate them through real-time experiments. Then we garner more support and we can scale them up and implement.
I love it. Action-oriented. I think that's the key word.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter if it's outside as an entrepreneur or it's inside as entrepreneur in a company, is make the things happen. Action-oriented. I think that's the key.
Yeah.
Yeah. And finally, to close this conversation, the founding of the jugar behavior. Because sometimes from the public policy, from the organization, we want to give resources to support innovation. But sometimes that happens a lot in informal communities. In your expertise and your other experience that you see in other countries, how we can give funds to these jugar innovators in informal way.
In a formal environment, how do we give them resources? Yeah, so I personally think it's good sometimes to start without a lot of resources. That isn't to say you don't need resources to scale up. But I think that when you start with the constraints, you become a lot more creative. And the reason I know this is for a long time, I've gone into many corporations across industries and we do exercises where we ask people to solve a problem. 2 groups. One group, for example, says, okay, you have $100 budget. Another group, you have a $1 million budget. They're both trying to solve the same problem. And what you see is immediately the $100 low budget group is thinking, what do I have? What can I leverage? What is already there? In the $1 million group, they're trying to spend the money because if you don't use it, you lose it, right? And they're basically creating problems that don't even exist. So it's a totally different mindset. But what I would say in terms of resourcing the jugar or recursividad innovators in the companies is after they do those small scale tests, it's a great way to share the data and help leaders feel confident that, okay, now we can go to the next step. This deserves more attention or funding, or maybe we remove this other activity from what it is that you're doing so that we can advance this. So I think that's a great way to build support to start with. When it's more proven and you continue and you want to scale, sure, then you can invest bigger and bigger resources. But at the start, I believe in it's like the constraints as a catalyst for creativity.
So definitely scarcity is going to be good in this environment. Simone, thank you for being with us in Innovation Land in ANDI, and thank you for this conversation.
Thank you, Alejo. It's been a blast to be here with ANDI and back in Medellin. Yeah. Right. Thank you.